It's week 3 of the preseason. That means it does kind of matter. Always matters. It just doesn't count in preseason football. But this week is the dress rehearsal for the regular season, and the Audible Live is here for you. It is Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Waldman, Dr. Jene Bramel. We are all here. And Bloom, we are rejoicing in the fact that we have preseason football that matters more than others.
It kind of matters. Although I wonder if this is the first year where some teams are going to take the approach that a lot of fantasy football players wanted, which is, I don't want anyone to get hurt in the preseason, so don't play them. I know the Packers have already said they're not going to play a lot of their starters. So you didn't see Jay Ajayi tonight. It's good for him to get a little bit of rest, but so maybe we're seeing some evolution in terms of player protection and knowing how much players really do need to play in the preseason. That being said, I'm glad that all the hemming and hawing and taking in new information and trying to decide what to do with it will be over, and we can draft and then live or die with our teams.
That's, Matt, why this week is so very important, because like they can say what they want to say. They have to tell us basically this week whether they want to or not.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of good indicators in terms of who's going to be playing, what kind of role they'll likely have. And, that's a really fun little thing to see in terms of how this roster is going to go. But it's also kind of fun, if you're really deep into dynasty leagues or looking for guys who are going to be on the waiver wire who might matter. It's fun to watch that 4th preseason game to see who kind of like lives or dies on that roster and gets a shot. So, if you're gonna enjoy the preseason, bleed it out for all it's worth. Wring that rag until it's dry.
Well, I will say, in the ultimate football geekery, I have every preseason game from 2000 till now. I have this many week 4 games. So I guess I miss out. I guess I just start drinking next week. Dr. Jene, that's bad for my health. But let's talk about Tyrod Taylor, he's out, he's in. Our boss Joe Bryant sends an email like, "Oh my God!" And then now he's back in.
Why is he back in?
What are we looking at here with Tyrod?
He bloomed him.
Maybe
He used him.
Yeah, I think Bloom just got talked, and I think this has been going on for a few years, where teams are trying to protect their own players, but Tyrod Taylor runs off the field with his arm hanging, looks like it might be a significant injury. Turns out not to be, and then they put him back in the game. So I don't know. Maybe they are trying to evaluate Tyrod Taylor versus Baker Mayfield for relatively earlier in the year. I'm not really sure why you put a player out there who you just had a little bit of an injury scare with, if you're counting on him to be, the face of your offensive huddle come week 1. So doesn't look like it's a big deal. It was his non-passing hand, wrist, whatever it turns out to be. I suppose there's a chance there could be more to it tomorrow after he wakes up, but you would assume X-rays, and it was reassuring, and he's back playing. So he's made it through the rest of the first half without any difficulty, and hopefully Baker Mayfield does the same.
Gene, we now have some information about Rashard Matthews.
Yeah.
Meniscus surgery, first week of August. So how does that give us some focus on his situation?
Well, I think it's helpful to know that he was dealing with something else when he missed OTAs and minicamp, and maybe it was within the same range of potential injuries there. But Paul Karski, who's the one that broke the story today, was pretty specific about saying it was something different, which hopefully means that it was a minor situation. They took the little small piece of meniscus out that was bothering him, and it's not going to be a longer-term chronic situation. These type of surgeries where they just sort of trim the abraded meniscus out are usually, sometimes we see players return within a couple of weeks during the regular season, depending on how well the rehab goes. So it was reported to have occurred early in August. We're getting toward the end of the month now. He'll have had 6 full weeks to recover, close to it, before the regular season starts. Sounds like he's been running routes and doing more and more. And if everything goes as planned, you would not expect this to be a short-term issue. In other words, he's available week 1, and then hopefully not a long-term issue that gives him any trouble going through the rest of the season either.
So it sounds to me like we're still on track for Nick Foles to start the season as the starting quarterback for the Eagles. Is that where we are now after last week's little bit of a roller coaster scare?
I mean, I don't know. It's good that, after my concerns last Thursday night with it not looking, similar to how Tyrod Taylor looked just a few minutes ago, it was reason to be concerned about whether or not Foles would miss multiple weeks or not. But I don't know that necessarily changes the calculus much for Carson Wentz, in that I think this was the plan with Wentz all along, which was, okay, we're not going to put him on the PUP list. We already saw him do some 11-on-11 work during minicamp. Let's bring him along slowly, give him 2 to 3 weeks to get ready for the season, and start ramping up his practice participation now before the third preseason game, so we know what we have in him, and we can decide whether or not we want to use him as a pocket quarterback, change the game plan. And I know the Eagles offensive coordinator said that they wouldn't do that, but Carson Wentz is not likely to be in condition to run zone read options and scramble in the same way he was before this injury. Just not likely to be ready yet. And the medical staff has kind of told us that. So, but I think if he's close to being ready, they may go ahead and use him over Foles. But the other piece of the calculus we sort of hinted at last week is that it's unlikely that they were going to start Nate Sudfeld over Nick Foles if the two were healthy. And I think it's more likely for Carson Wentz to sit for a week or two with Foles healthy than not. So that really hasn't changed. But I think most of Wentz's availability, the decision on his availability in week 1 is going to be dependent on how he looks in these next couple of weeks, whether or not his knee has any issues as they ramp up his practice participation, and then what his comfort level is inside the pocket. And if they put him in those situations and he does okay, maybe they'll clear him for week 1. I don't think we're going to see him in preseason week 4 either. So I think all we're going to know is whether or not his practice participation is enough to have him ready to go.
Does rubbing dirt on an injury actually work? No, I kid, but what's going on with Josh Rosen? That was my real question, Gene.
I don't know. What is going on with Josh Rosen?
Got the little thumb thing, back at practice, not throwing, did not appear to be throwing during the open portion of practice. Arizona runs their practices a little bit differently after training camp's done.
Yeah, well, anytime you got an injury to the throwing hand, throwing elbow, throwing shoulder of your quarterback, you're going to be a little bit more deliberate with it. I wasn't aware that there was anything specific going on. A couple of days of missed practice probably isn't great for his competition to start with Sam Bradford, but it doesn't sound like it's anything that's going to set him back for the longer term. If it stretches out a little bit longer, and we find out that he's not practicing through next week and really not having much of a chance to participate in that last preseason game in any form or fashion, then there's reason to be concerned that that maybe we'll see Bradford even a little bit longer than we expected. But I think that competition was pretty close, and hopefully the thumb won't set him back much.
When you hear Marlon Mack is not a slam dunk for week 1, what does that allow us to fill in terms of the range of severity of his hamstring injury?
Not a surprise. I think they were pretty quick to say that he had no chance to return during the preseason at all, and as early in the preseason as his hamstring strain occurred, that makes you feel like this is a range, and that tends to be for a running back 3 to 6 weeks as far as a wide range goes, and usually you're looking at kind of the 4 to 6 week range, which put him toward the end of the preseason, and then we'll see. So he, like many of these other players, Saquon Barkley and others that are dealing with these soft tissue injuries, the muscle strains, have got to get back and recondition themselves far enough in advance to be able to play, and we're getting up against that time this week. Even though it's dress rehearsal for some teams, that doesn't necessarily mean that these players have to be back and practicing and participate, but we're getting close to the point where teams need to know what they're going to go into week 1 with. And some players, Mac probably included here, who have been part of the offenses in the past, and teams have already game planned them in previous years and previous games, probably don't have to be practicing until game prep for the following week. But you would definitely like to hear that he's doing a little bit more movement, that he's doing some individual drills to feel better about him being available for week 1. And I don't think there's ever been much optimism that he was definitely going to be available. I've had him listed questionable all along, and I don't know that we're ready to say that he's on the doubtful side of questionable yet, but he needs to be doing something in the next 7 to 10 days to give him any chance to play week 1. And then if he's not practicing in advance of week 1, then we wonder, is it a little bit more of a high-grade injury where it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks, and it may be some time into the regular season before we see him.
Gene, one of our followers, The Wreck, wants to know if Sony Michel's dynasty options are on the side of his nickname, or is it something that he could trust him maybe for at least a few years in dynasty leagues?
I think we're in the same place with Michel as we were with Jay Ajayi and others who we know are coming into the league with some sort of degenerative condition that's already advanced enough where somebody is at least leaking rumors that there's bone-on-bone situation inside the knee. So, if you take a funny step, if you get tackled in a certain way and those bones kind of bump up against each other a little bit, you're more likely to have swelling, you're more likely to have pain. We're looking at limited practice participation and potentially missed games and things like that. microfracture surgery in the worst case scenario. And I'm not saying those things are likely with Sony Michel, but they are definitely within the range of possibilities. But like Jay Ajayi, other than maybe him having a little bit of a weird waddle and how he sprints a little bit, we've not seen him miss much time, maybe some practice time, but it really hasn't limited him much. I think the bigger deal with these players, like with back injuries and otherwise, is it's reasonable to expect and maybe suspect that his career will be shortened. But that doesn't mean that he can't have 3, 4, 5, 6, or even longer, more productive years in the league. And other than the fact that he's already had his knee drain, that doesn't necessarily portend that this year is going to be a bust for him or that he's never going to be able to reach what potential he may have had. So you'd like to see him, like these other players, get back and start doing some more in practice. The time frame for him was initially right up to the end of the preseason, and I know it got revised to the 7 to 10 day range, but he's another player that you consider week to week until he gets back to practice and proves that he doesn't need additional procedures and some limited practice time to keep him healthy through the season.
I'm drinking straight mixer tonight, but I may throw something in that, Dr. Gene, because I'm worried about Dalvin Cook. They say he's going to play tomorrow. Advisable or no?
Nah, he's all right. I think, we saw a lot of things go positively for him in the offseason through OTAs and minicamp, and he's another player that, you know what you have in him. He was productive last year. There's really not been any changes at all other than, what's going on around the quarterback position, things like that for them. So, and I would expect him to be fine. There's nothing that suggests that he's not been able to practice or otherwise. I think they're just limiting his game reps because he doesn't necessarily need those.
Gene, we always take under advisement what you remind us, that players tend to inflate on the positive side how they're doing in injury recovery. So when Chris Thompson says, I'm not going to be 100% until November, how would that make you feel about drafting him at his ADP, let's say around the 7th, 8th round?
I think it's a mental thing for Thompson right now more than a physical thing. He knows that most players, the bones will not be completely remodeled and healed for some time, but that doesn't necessarily mean he is not physically ready to return. And they wouldn't be allowing him to practice. He'd be missing more practice time than he has if there was an issue there. His comments had more to do with, I need to be able to trust it when I cut, that I'm not going to feel it, that I'm not going to have any pain. And he's still, with the hardware in his leg, has some pain from time to time when he moves. And it's going to be a question of how much that limits him, number of carries, effectiveness as he carries. But I think once he clears that hurdle, and the more he puts himself in those situations and is successful, the farther back in his mind, hopefully, the injury goes. So I think it's just going to take some time. I wouldn't be too worried about him. I don't think I'd drop him further out of the range that he's in now. I certainly wouldn't move him multiple tiers back just because of what he said there. I would expect him to be okay.
Let's move from one to another in the Patriots backfield and talk a little bit about Rex Burkhead. How do you feel about his prospects now that he's revealed that he's had a knee issue?
Yeah, and I've seen some speculation that the tear was an MCL sprain. I haven't seen any specifics about this at all. I think that's a reasonable and most optimistic and hopeful approach to take, because that's something that's likely to pretty much fully heal before the season starts and not limit him at all. But tear could be meniscus, tear could be other ligaments. I don't think I'm willing to say that it's definitely an MCL injury, even though I've seen a little bit of speculation on Twitter. The fact that he's returned to practice is a good sign. It really does not seem to be something that's going to limit him for week 1, but he's yet another player that we need to see kind of consecutively practice as we lead up closer to the regular season. But it would seem like this is best case scenario for all of the things that we were a little bit concerned about as far as the injury was when it was undisclosed.
It is the Audible Live. We're going around the horn with Dr. Jene Bramel, talking about some players that are banged up, some situations out there as well, including one I can't pronounce. And really, what does this mean for Travis Frederick with Guillain-Barré syndrome? Yeah. I think I got that right, Dr.
Close
Gene.
enough.
What does it mean also for Ezekiel Elliott and this offensive line? Like, let's talk about this autoimmune disease. Mark Schlereth had it. He had it in the early 90s, and he said it took him about 1.5 years. Yeah. He lost most of the feeling in his arms and legs for 6 months. They felt he was never going to play again. And it took stink back then 1.5 years. Now there are, you've got recovery and you've got healing you can do in today's medical technology. Back then, They just put Stink in a hospital bed and gave him a bedpan, and that was it. But what about this autoimmune disease? What does it mean for Frederick and playing at all this season and everything going on here?
Yeah, so you're close. It's Guillain-Barré syndrome, so it's pretty close. You don't really pronounce the N there, but it's pretty good. And you're right. So it's an autoimmune disease. So what happens is the body's immune system is basically attacking any and all nerves in the body. And when that happens, when the lining of the nerves they don't function very well, and you knew something was unusual with Frederick from the beginning when they said stingers. And usually they'll just say stinger on the same side, that sort of stuff. So when you hear what sounds like stingers on both sides of the body, you wonder, when they said that he was going to see multiple spine surgeons and things like that, was it a spinal stenosis condition? Was there something else going on that was causing symptoms on both sides? But we've talked about this with Jalen Smith, and this is not the same situation, but and Peyton Manning and lots of other folks, when there's nerves involved, and they take time to heal, and the healing comes at different rates, at different speeds, and sometimes not fully recovery. So Guillain-Barré syndrome can be really significant, where it's not just numbness and pain and weakness, and it might mimic a stinger, where the nerves are damaged to the point where there's paralysis. And sometimes the nerves that are damaged involves nerves that help you to breathe, and these folks need to be on breathing machines for a long period of time. So one of the optimistic things that was suggested last night when it was first reported was that it was caught early. I don't know that I would necessarily consider this as being caught early, but it was caught early enough before it could potentially have progressed to something like that. And some of the medications and treatments that are done to try to dampen the immune system's response to what's going on so that it doesn't progress can be helpful, but it's very much a day by day, week by week, month by month procedure. And this is not something that Frederick is likely to recover from quickly. There have been folks that would probably recover within a number of weeks, but I think it's much more likely that he misses the entire season than that he's back in some time during the first month of the year. So this is a long recovery, and he nor his doctors and therapists probably have much idea right now about a timetable or a time frame to expect him to recover. With regard to the Dallas offensive line, I'm not sure there's a healthy member of that offensive line right now. Now, I don't expect La'el Collins to miss regular season time with his ankle, and it sounds like Zach Martin's knee is not a long-term issue, and he's likely to play. But there's lots of issues going on with that offensive line. I would be shocked if we saw Frederick until midseason at the earliest. And at this point, I think, similar to what we said about Ryan Shazier, you're hoping for a football recovery at this point, and it's going to be difficult. I think it's more likely that Frederick returns than Shazier returns, but this is a significant illness with an unknown recovery and an unknown recovery timetable. So we're rooting for Frederick, obviously. Hopefully he gets a full recovery here, but it's not going to be quick in the slightest.
Between the 49ers running back injuries, the AC sprain and the calf strain, which one would be more worrisome if you were doing some sort of tiebreaker? Like, I want to take a 49ers running back, but which one is less likely to have further problems with his injury?
Probably Breida. Because he's likely to get more than enough recovery time. What sounded like a low-grade shoulder sprain, that AC sprain, even though it's a running back and he's likely to take continued hits on that shoulder, you would normally see that as somewhere between a 1 to 4 week injury, and they're not going to let him return during the preseason, so he's going to have over a month to recover. And you would hope that would give it enough time to where, we won't go through what we saw with Randall Cobb and many other players over the years where, they'll take a hit and then they're going to have to miss some additional time. And hopefully that proves to be the case with McKinnon as well. But when you talk about a soft tissue injury, any sort of muscle strain in a running back in the lower body, whether it's groin, quad, hamstring, calf, whatever it may be, those things are prone to aggravation. And I'd feel a lot more comfortable about McKinnon saying the same thing about him as we just talked about Breida. If he makes it through that 7 to 10 day period without an aggravation and he proves he can get back to practice without difficulty, and he's not there yet, and it's going to take a little bit of time before the 49ers trust that they can put him in that situation. So I'm not too worried about either one of them. But in terms of aggravation and lingering into the regular season, I think you have to be more worried about McKinnon than Breida.
So, Gene, this is kind of a two-tier question on one guy, and it's Rashad Penny. He's got that left index finger fracture, and we just read about Frank Gore last year having a thumb fracture. They were going to put a pin in it, and he said, "Nah, I'll play, whatever. I'm going to go ahead and play and be a top 20 fantasy back at age 34." Now we have young Rashad Penny, who somehow is getting the Pete Carroll rainbow glasses and seeing, I see Marshawn Lynch, and Rashad Penny's out with an index finger fracture. Oh, and by the way, he's added enough weight in 4 months to at least occupy that third bookshelf behind you on your left. So I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about, whether or not those books that he added to his frame are muscle, or are they fat, and what's going on with the finger, and why does he need time off, whereas a guy like Frank Gore doesn't need any time at all? What's the difference between you using the thumb and the index finger in terms of carrying?
A lot.
And did he break the finger pulling a chicken wing away from Eddie Lacy?
Yeah.
Does
Seattle have good chicken wings? I don't know. We need a Seattle resident to tell us what it is that they could possibly do to their finger.
What is it, Bloom, up there in Seattle? Pike's Market?
Yeah,
They
fish.
show the fish?
Yeah, that's fish. That's not.
Trying to catch a fish? Maybe that's what it was. I thought he was a good receiver.
Frank Gore is an animal, is the answer to that question. He's a monster. You probably should not be messing with your thumb if you're looking for quality of life later. But this is what Frank Gore is. He's played through multiple injuries, recovered from devastating knee things. That's not particularly surprising. Not to say that other players in the league aren't tough for that sort of stuff, but you would put Frank Gore probably at the top of the list of players who would say, I'm just going to go ahead and play, and I'll deal with the consequences of that.
Frank Gore's Cotton Hill and King of the Hill. He has no ankles, but
pretty much.
Yeah.
The finger is difficult too, but it seems like once they got in there and did the procedure, it went smoothly. It wasn't in a location that was likely to cause too much trouble. He's got some time before the beginning of the regular season to recover. Grip strength, pass catching ability, the ability to pass protect appropriately are all limiting factors, but we've seen other running backs, whether it be hand or finger injuries, recover within the range of a month. So we do see Pete Carroll be a little bit rosy and sunny with his predictions, but when he's specific like that, it usually means that somebody's given him every reason to believe that's the case, and more often than not, that usually proves true with the Seahawks players. Not always, but we hear concern pretty much immediately. We heard it with Cam Chancellor when, I think there's some certain things about Pete Carroll where you may not want to completely trust things, but generally his injury information is pretty spot on. And I don't have too much concern about the weight that Penny gained. I think just watch and see how he functions behind another difficult offensive line. I think those things are going to be more issues for Penny over the long term rather than the hand or weight gain or loss.
One more lap around for Dr. Jene Bramel tonight here on the Audible Live. Dr. Jene, appreciate your time as always, brother. Is Lamar Jackson taking too many hits? Because Marty Morningweg says, yeah.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think I would be nervous, whatever I know, right? But about my quarterback taking hits in general. I think the teams that we've seen have their quarterback in harm's way, whether it's a pocket quarterback and the offensive line is terrible like Andrew Luck. That's what led to all of this, was Andrew Luck getting beaten up a little bit and his shoulder popping out, and led to all this 2 to 3 years, more than that actually now, of trouble that he's been through. RG3 being out of the pocket, all of his injuries occurred when he was out of the pocket. We've seen Russell Williams, Aaron Rodgers struggle at times because he's out of the pocket with his groin strings and hamstrings and calves and collarbones and all those sorts of things. So, you want to use the weapons that you have. And there's something about Aaron Rodgers being out of the pocket that's good. Same thing goes with Carson Wentz and RG3 and all the others. That goes for Lamar Jackson as well. But I think you have to teach him how to limit as much as you can, putting himself in harm's way. And maybe you're careful about how often that happens. Put Cam Newton in that category too. He's beaten up a little bit over the last couple of years, and we've seen his numbers decline because he's probably not been as healthy as he could have been as we go. So, you need to use Lamar Jackson out of the pocket. That's part of what his game is. But the fewer times he can take rough hits there, the better it's going to be for him.
Gene, you did give a vote of confidence to the usually sunny Pete Carroll, who said that Doug Baldwin's on track to be ready for week 1. What's your final advice to people that are going to have to, in the moment of truth, in the 3rd or 4th round, decide whether or not to take Baldwin?
So Doug Baldwin is running. There hasn't been any indication that he needed a surgical procedure. And I think the Seahawks, more frequently than other teams and other sets of players, have been a little bit more likely to send players out for these Regenikine injections. Again, that's not been confirmed yet, but it certainly seems like what it is. And so you allow the knee to cool off a little bit. You hope that the inflammation settles down, and within 2 or 3 weeks start to ramp up the practice participation. And that's what we've seen with Baldwin. He's been sprinting. He's been starting to do some individual stuff. It's not necessarily drills, but he's getting back into some football related activity, and you would expect them to allow him to do a little bit more this week in advance of preparing him to play in week 1. And that has seemingly been the expectation in Seattle from the beginning. And even Pete Carroll kind of noticed, I think, that maybe he was a little bit more pessimistic than maybe he wanted to be with Baldwin in those first couple of days, because when he was asked shortly afterwards in a radio interview, he said, yeah, Baldwin will for sure be ready in week 1. And that seems to be the way it's gone. Now, similar to Sony Michel and all these other players with potential knee issues that could become chronic, things like this could flare up at any point. We haven't been aware that this has been a chronic or a longer term issue for Baldwin in the past. So you would hope that, like many of the other Seattle players who went through this earlier last year in training camp and beyond, and we're ready to go in week 1, that we see the same thing for Baldwin. So maybe you keep him a little bit further down in that particular tier. But I don't think I would have too much concern in drafting at this point. Just realize that that it's still a little bit of an unknown, whereas probably by this time next week, we'll have a pretty good sense of whether or not he's going to be ready or not.
So let's end this segment on a player who started in Denver, was a Sigmund Bloom favorite, and is now in Seattle, and that's Brandon Marshall. Brandon Marshall is apparently recovered from his toe and ankle surgeries from last year, but how recovered is he really going to be at this age? And how much would you have an over under as an idea? I mean, is it an issue that you would be concerned about if indeed he's playing as well as they say that he is over the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it helps, right? I think age, I think wear and tear over the years. I think the fact that he, maybe you blame this on the offenses he's played for recently, but he hasn't looked like the player he was previously. It's just the natural course of events for veteran wide receivers like him. It's rare to see players continue to be productive through nagging injuries, through age, into their mid-30s and beyond anyway. So as another player that, I'm not really sure where the targets are going to come from for him. I don't know that the injuries those particular injuries put him at higher risk of aggravations to ankles and toes or beyond. But when the legs start to break down for a wide receiver, it's time to be concerned.
He is Dr. Jene Bramel. You follow him on Twitter at Jene Bramel, and check out his work at footballguys.com. A second opinion blog is something you need to read as much as possible. Dr. Jene, I'm not saying you got to go Patch Adams on me, baby. But if you could wear a choker, like a little necklace thing with some boar's teeth like me, I'd appreciate that on your rounds.
There won't be any necklaces.
I'm gonna leave that to you. Nothing.
I don't think that's going to work well.
I can see Cecil with a bag coming out of the airport in Atlanta in January already.
There are no white coats. There are no ties. I would
Shark's
get away
tooth?
with no shark's teeth either.
Okay.
So, all I'm going to do, that's going to get grabbed, and my neck is going to be torn off by the 18-month-olds who don't care for me very much at their age with their stranger anxiety. So you deal with the teeth, and I'll stay away from those.
We'll do that. Dr. Jene, be good, baby. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
It's only weird if you make it weird. The Bloom, these are Chewy's teeth. These are one of my favorite boars of all time. These are his teeth.
You knew that you were on a first name basis with the boar?
Oh, I had Chewy
You
trained.
read books to him, right? At lunchtime? Wasn't that it? You'd eat lunch and hang out and read a book?
This show's taking a wild and obnoxious turn. So Bloom, we're leaving you in charge, which
I'm the adult in the room now.
To steer us back onto the road. What's going on in the games tonight?
Well, basically, it's Tyrod Taylor dodging an injury bullet. Although it really has been truly, and gentlemen, we've been doing this show together for a long time. I can't remember a preseason with more head-scratching coaching moves and proclamations than Hugh Jackson's preseason. I mean, it really is one of those things like delirium or dementia or something. I don't know what's going on with Hugh Jackson, but he put Tyrod Taylor back in the game. So that's been getting a lot of the talk. Nick Foles did not look good I think that Doug Peterson even said something to that effect. He didn't look good or didn't play well, or he's seen enough. It was disappointing. So that Thursday night game, that's interesting to look ahead if Foles is starting there. Carlos Hyde is the clear starter in Cleveland. It may not end up that way at the end of the year. Philly didn't really. Zach Ertz caught a lot of short targets, but Philly didn't really show us a lot. It was more like the offense that we saw when Foles was in at the end of the regular season, not the postseason. And also, I want to say there might have been some talk that Josh Gordon, when he's cleared, won't be a starter right away. But it's Hugh Jackson, so it's really unpredictable. This has been a pretty boring game. And again, I actually think this is going to be the most boring preseason week 3 that we've seen. And I would expect a lot of teams are going to play it safe. And I don't know. I think a lot of what we had to learn that's really important in the preseason, we might have learned already.
Matt, do you agree with that? Because if that's the case, then we got to go back and pour over those training camp reports that Bob Henry puts together at Footballguys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably what we're going to have to do here. I mean, it's an interesting prospect. I mean, looking at this game, I mean, I think that they're looking at, the number of injuries that there probably have been in the past and the concussions, and they were up last year, weren't they? So from what I remember, even after what they've been trying to institute. And so I think they are trying to be extra cautious with their squads and making sure that things work out. I mean, it's been kind of an interesting game from the standpoint to me that the offensive lines that just haven't really played all that well on either side of the ball, at least in Cleveland here. So, but at the same time, I was joking around about Duke Johnson with Bloom because he and I both watched him a while back and both liked his game. But I was joking around that Duke Johnson stinks because he missed a block. But he did miss a block. And, it's interesting to see how that's going to work out in pass pro with Cleveland and having to shuffle their offensive line already early on. Because to be honest with you, I think really the best blocker on this team might wind up being Nick Chubb down the line. In terms of being able to handle a variety of defenders. So this is, and then Hugh Jackson, I mean, whatever you want to say, I mean, I would say it's kind of a parallel to what's going on.
Well, it's like
outside of football right now.
It's like one of those things whenever everybody at the office knows someone's going to be fired at the end of the month, but they don't know. That's how it feels. One thing other team in this game, we didn't get a chance to see him last year in the preseason, but Myles Garrett is stealing headlines tonight. And perhaps if he and Emmanuel Ogbach can stay healthy, that could be interesting. And certainly week 1 against the Steelers, I know that somebody will be rooting for them to get home.
Yeah. I would add Jennard Avery to that list, a guy who Scott Bischoff's talked a fair bit about. He's the one who caused the fumble on Foles and was able to get that pressure as a situational guy. So the fact that they have a rotation with 3 guys who can do some pretty good work is nice. And if they can just, if they can figure out a secondary, that might not be a bad thing.
Bloom, real quick before we jump into the news items and get to one of your favorite players right off the bat, do you feel with more of a vanilla week 3, this will lead to some more bad football and maybe offenses trying to find themselves over that first? We always know week 1 is difficult to project. We'll do the preview show. Week 2 is a little bit easier, but until we get about week 4 and we get some idea what these teams want to do, if it truly is kind of pumping the brakes during the preseason, everyone's taking it easy, nobody wants to get hurt, does that mean we should extend that time of, well, it might be some bad football, might be some slower offenses to find themselves?
Yes, and I believe we will have our fair share of false indicators in week 1, especially when we look at some of the matchups. Seattle's going to probably look bad at Denver. That doesn't mean that their offense is done. Oakland might have trouble with the Rams. San Francisco might have trouble going to Minnesota. If Dallas's offensive line is as banged up as it is now, Carolina might make things really hard on them. Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be the quarterback for Tampa. What are we going to really learn about their offense? Chicago's going to Lambeau in primetime, which has been a house of horrors for them. The new Giants offense is going to face Jacksonville. Pat Mahomes goes and faces the Chargers, which, as the injuries pile up, maybe it's not as scary. So there are a lot of games where you look at them and say, well, wherever we are at 1 week in, we probably shouldn't panic or start to let those takes set because those matchups aren't the best indicators. And now when you add this in, Cease, that teams aren't going to be well prepared, that just exacerbates it.
fake news or false indicators, at least. I'll say this about Seattle and Denver. I'm starting Nick Vannett. That's a DFS tip. He will be a what the heck flex. A spoiler alert, because Denver can't stop a tight end to save their life. Bloom.
Years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bloom. Kristen Michael.
Yeah, right.
Seriously, we gotta still talk about this guy.
Talk about Kristen Michael. He might start week 1 against Cincinnati. And even though it should be Jordan Wilkins, but he fumbled at the goal line. Frank Reich is probably, this is going to be your Andrew Luck throws the ball 650 times. So that's what I'm going to take out of this. I think that the Colts backfield is probably not a place to go shopping for your running back flyers at this point, but the offense will squarely land on Andrew Luck's shoulders. And what's interesting about this is if you start to do projection games with, say, 600 or 620 targets, you can give T.Y. Hilton 150. That's why I took him in the 3rd round last night. You can give T.Y. Hilton 150 or 160. It's going to put him among the league leaders. You could actually be very generous and give each tight end 100 targets. Both will be good picks. Both Doyle and Ebron will be good picks. Now we're up to the 350, 360. Those secondary receivers, Ryan Grant, etc., 100 targets. Okay, now we're at 460. I mean, even the teams that throw to the running backs incessantly won't throw them more than, say, 120, 130 times, except for teams like New England and New Orleans. So that leaves targets. And this isn't even exploring if Luck gets into the 640, 650 territory. So I look at Doyle, Hilton, maybe even throwing a last round pick at someone like Ryan Grant, because there are going to be a lot of targets to go around in this offense.
Matt, how do you break down the Colts situation, specifically Jordan Wilkins, who was that fantasy darling? Everyone's like, shh, don't say it. Well, everybody knows, at least you should know, about Jordan Wilkins. And, well, now the fumble is Bloom highlighted, and we're talking about Kristen Michael again.
Well, he'll get worked back in. I mean, so did all the players who fumble early in the preseason. We've seen that with Samaje Perine. We've seen that with other players who fumble early on in the preseason, and they get another chance. Whether they do anything with it is another story. And I think the thing that concerns me more about anything about Indianapolis is that I haven't seen much improvement from their offensive line. Yes, Quentin Nelson is going to be a really good one at some point. And he's probably already showing that, but this offensive line needs to have some cohesion, as our buddy Matt Batante would talk about in terms of how they play together. And that hasn't really shown up very well right now. And we know that Andrew Luck takes, other than, maybe Russell Wilson and Cam Newton, Andrew Luck takes a ton of hits. And when I look at that and I look at that offensive line and the history of it, I don't want anything out of Andrew Luck. And unless Jacoby Brissett has really improved because he's had a full off season, I don't think his rapport with T.Y. Hilton is something to say is a foregone conclusion. So I would be a little worried about this offense because just from precedent, they can't protect their passer. And so if I'm going to, if I'm playing moderate risk football, fantasy football, I think what Bloom has to say is absolutely on the button. But if you're more of a conservative drafter and you're like, I want to pick players who have good offensive lines that protect their quarterbacks and open up the ground game, Indianapolis is a place that you're going to fly over that area. You're not going to land there and hang out.
Man, we got a road trip to Jared's bar because he's in the chat room right now. What's up, Jared? He says he runs the Bottle House Brewery in Mead Hall, Lakewood, Ohio. Any and all Football Guys fans are welcome to stop in anytime. I want a shot called Sorry Joe. So every time, Sorry Joe, boom, throw it down. We also have the chat room fired up about Jimmy Graham, Bloom. Why isn't there more discussion, buzz, energy surrounding Jimmy Graham this year?
I'll contribute to that. And if I can't get Rob Gronkowski in the 2nd round, I'm thinking Jimmy Graham in the 5th round. And this is mostly a chip that you're putting on Aaron Rodgers. However, chemistry between quarterback and wide receiver, quarterback and tight end is a very underrated part of fantasy outlook. And it is Jimmy Graham's first year in Green Bay. And there was excitement about Martellus Bennett last year. I probably was responsible for a good part of that. That being said, Aaron Rodgers says Jimmy Graham's the X factor in our offense. He says no one he's played with goes better from paper football to real football than Jimmy Graham. He says Jimmy Graham understands how to attack defenses as the play unfolds. He says he catches everything. Aaron Rodgers is good enough that if Aaron Rodgers is thinking those things, Aaron Rodgers can feed Jimmy Graham. They had the one preseason touchdown. If I'm going to overreact to one play in the preseason, it's Mahomes to Hill. But and I love overreacting to one play. I'm guilty of it. But
the atomic bomb.
Yeah, nice. I overreact. I'm willing to overreact to this touchdown simply because if you watch the play, Jimmy Graham might not be that quick anymore, but he's quick enough to create a window, and Aaron Rodgers can create windows where there aren't windows. And he put the ball in a place in the red zone for a touchdown that only Jimmy Graham could catch it, and it was easy for Jimmy Graham to catch it. So if they have that kind of pitch and catch going on in the red zone, I don't care if Jimmy Graham averages 8 yards a catch. If 12 or 14 or 15 are touchdowns, he's going to be a good 5th-round pick. And Jordy Nelson had 12 red zone touchdowns in 2016. So this is not crazy at all. I'm thinking if you're going to spend a 5th-round pick and you want to get Aaron Rodgers in your lineup, instead of taking Aaron Rodgers, take Jimmy Graham.
Matt, how do we look at that Packers backfield since we're on the team? Might as well stay there because I guess Jamal Williams is healthy-ish now, and that battle still continues, and it's still confusing fantasy jams out there.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And that's one of those situations that as we start to see more injuries to the running back position or greater uncertainty to other players around the league, then you start to have to account for this Packers team a little bit more. And I think that Williams is probably the right pick at this stage of the game, just because of the fact that he continues to run hard. He was the MVP. He was the rookie of the year for the team because he can pass protect, because he can catch. He's someone that Aaron Rodgers seems to trust on that level. And I really did think the light came on after the second Bears game, and you saw a quicker version of Jamal Williams. He was a step quicker in all facets of what he was doing. It's just everything was kind of coming together and how he read everything. And I think that, certainly we can say Aaron Jones is a faster runner. We can say that Ty Montgomery offers a little bit of a blend of both backs. But, in terms of pass protection and catching the ball, Williams doesn't have the drop off in catching the ball compared to the other two who have a big drop off in pass protection. So I think that he's the guy that you definitely want to target, and Jones is probably the value that you want to go after there. And just to add to what Bloom said about Graham, I mean, if you want to look at it, Jimmy Graham's basically Frank Gore towards the end of his career with the 49ers, where for 4 years everyone was saying they need to get rid of him and move on. And, and they found like 4 backs that they had to run through that couldn't beat out Frank Gore. Seattle's offensive staff didn't really exploit Jimmy Graham the way that he should have been exploited. And, if Aaron Rodgers is either disappointed that you're in how you're playing, or disappointed that they let you go, or happy that you're here, you need to listen to that. I think that maybe that's some advice for the new GM who's trying to reinvent the wheel in Green Bay.
It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night right here on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. Thanks for watching on YouTube and subscribing. Hit the little bell, whatever you got to do. I don't know, YouTube. It's confusing, but we'll watch anyway. And thanks.
Don't speak badly about YouTube or it's going to drop us again.
Exactly. And of course, thank you for listening on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, etc. Bloom, can I make everybody jealous right now? Not with my boar's teeth necklace here. I want to make everybody jealous because I get to hear on the couch before anybody else. Okay, so I'm going to spoil a little bit of something of an episode that I'm editing right now. And you guys, you and Chris, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about Royce Freeman. Now, Curtis Kachuk, which I think is the noise that Wolverine makes when his claws come out. Actually, that's nicked, but we'll call it Curtis Wolverine, wants to hear my thoughts on Royce Freeman's outlook. And Chris had said that he doesn't see special with Royce Freeman. And it got me to thinking. And Matt, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this, because there are players out there that are effortless with what they do. And I remember people would say that about Willis McGahee, like, oh, he's not really running hard. Like, just because you don't see that effort and the guy kind of glides a little bit, doesn't mean that the ability to be special isn't there, and all those sorts of things. And we got to get into opportunity and Vance Joseph and parsing these words. You keep saying that we know who Devontae Booker is. We need to see more Royce Freeman. I wouldn't be surprised if the end backfield was a duo, not a committee, but a duo of Royce Freeman and Philip Lindsay, because all that guy does is make plays no matter what they do and whatever they give him. He's not going to push the pile, but he is going to be that nice receiver out of the backfield. There's, your Jerick McKinnon, if you will, for one, Case Keenum. But when I look at Royce Freeman, I've watched him in practice, Bloom, and went like, is he like trying? is he like taking it easy, or is he, and he still had the great footwork and all these sorts of things. But, you see Booker out there and he's slimmed down. He's really trying and he still kind of stinks. And Philip Lindsay's out there and he's really trying and he's explosive. And okay, you can see that effort. With Freeman, there's an effortless nature to what he does, but I don't think that means he's, can't be special in this offense. Now, it will be a duo, maybe a committee in Denver. So, we might be chasing our tail when we're looking at this situation. Royce Freeman went actually a little bit later in our Fessel draft last night. But let's really talk about this, Bloom, because I expect Freeman to emerge as that lead back. I don't care if Booker's the starter week 1. It is clear to me that they will and want to go with Royce Freeman. Their fascination with Devontae Booker seems to be over. They might keep him around like in Tommy Boy, the guarantee on the box. It just guarantees you got a piece of so it doesn't mean anything. And sorry, Joe, about that. But that's what it is. It's the veteran insurance, because they only have D'Angelo Henderson, a couple games last year, 1 screen pass for a touchdown, Philip Lindsay rookie, Royce Freeman rookie there as well. So let's discuss this, Bloom, and definitely, Matt, I want to hear, because when Royce Freeman runs, there is somewhat of is he running hard? And what he's doing is running around people and through people and by people. So let's get into this, Bloom.
Well, he's in a part of your draft where you're weighing him against guys like Mark Ingram, Lamar Miller, maybe Dion Lewis. But he is the kind of player that whatever his ADP looks like right now, there's probably somebody in your draft willing to take him a round ahead of that. So you're going to have to spend a 4th round pick, maybe closer to the area where Derrick Henry, Alex Collins are going off the board. And that's a little too rich for me, because I do think you're drafting him at a ceiling. That being said, because we've talked about when Denver actually leaned on CJ Anderson, he was productive and they won. CJ Anderson was another guy that never looked spectacular or flashy doing it, but boy, could he do it. He can still do it, even though Norv Turner's not going to use him. So I get it, and I think that in hindsight, we could look back at Royce Freeman as a good pick if he gets 300 touches, if he gets double-digit touchdowns, and it's there for him to do that in Denver. But I prefer Lamar Miller. I prefer taking the 4-game suspension of Mark Ingram and maybe getting a running back 1. But I don't think that Freeman has done anything to dispel the notion that he would take over this backfield for fantasy terms. I agree with you, by the way, that Philip Lindsay deserves to be, it could be like Tariq Cohen and Jordan Howard, something like that kind of mix with what Lindsay's been doing. And I'm just glad that Denver got Lindsay. I'm glad that Denver played this running back class the right way. They waited in the 3rd round. They got the one rookie running back who has really done a lot to increase his stock this summer.
And Matt, our final 2 picks, it was you and me, buddy. And you kept taking players I wanted right before me. It forced me to pick up Joe Flacco last night. But anyway, it was Chad Kelly, next to last pick. Very last pick in Fessel OG was Philip Lindsay. But let's discuss Royce Freeman. And if you agree, there is an effortless nature to what he does, and how that, that gliding style is not a bad thing. Although when you watch it, you're like, maybe he could run a little harder.
Yeah, and I think what happens here is that people really get seduced by athletic ability. It is the great seducer for skill players. And you can see it on display on Twitter almost every day when people show practice footage or highlights of a back like, say, Kenyon Drake. Good example of a player who, when it comes to jump cuts and acceleration and the ability to make somebody miss, he looks almost spectacular at times, and he has balance, just natural balance. When someone hits him, he can somehow stay upright and stagger through it. And maybe if there's enough space, he can regain his feet and continue running. And people love that. And when they see that, they're like, oh my God, look at that. That's talent. Yeah, it's raw talent. Because when you look at a guy like Kenyon Drake, and this is going to get to Royce Freeman pretty quickly here. He runs outside of his pads. His legs are everywhere. He doesn't run with great balance, and he doesn't have great control of his footwork. So what can happen to him is that, yeah, when a safety's screaming down a truck-sized hole and he can see it, he can stop, cut away, and come upfield and bend it and run through a huge crease. That's great. But when a defender pushes a blocker back as he's taking the exchange and he can see it, and he tries to jump cut into that, he ends up concussing himself because he rams into the guy's butt. If you want to talk about a butt fumble, he had the butt tackle where he got wiped out by his own lineman because he has no control over his feet. He's an unrefined player who is getting more refined, but will eventually get there. Marlon Back, same type of player. Frank Gore, unbelievably refined runner. He makes it look easy. That's why when you see like a 3-yard gain from him and go, oh, he only averages 3.8 yards a carry. Yeah, that's true because his line stinks, but he's still getting first downs for this team and keeping them on schedule because he's so smooth and makes it look easy that you're thinking whatever. Royce Freeman's that same type of player. He runs in an insane amount of control. He keeps his feet under his pads so that he's always balanced. His footwork and his ability to read what's going on and adjust to it smoothly. It looks like he didn't even have to make any effort to do it. That's what you're basically seeing there is when Tom Brady drops back and he cycles through a couple of reads and he gallops a couple of steps away from, people, coming off the edge and throws the ball like it was nothing. And you think the offensive line did a great job there when it was, in fact, a lot of it was him. And I think that's the same things I'm seeing with Royce Freeman is that he has, when I watched him in Oregon, he had spectacular footwork. The only issue I saw with Royce Freeman was, is he really that explosive? And is he really going to be okay as a pass protector? Like he was kind of up and down as a pass protector. But I know that Daniel Simpkins loved him as well, football guy Daniel Simpkins, and we've talked a lot about him. And since February, we're both like, I remember he's asking me, what do you think about him? Because I'm really excited. And I'm saying, I'm hoping that he's the guy I can get in drafts because now, especially in Denver, because Devontae Booker, as you described, I mean, my joke about him this week is that when I watched him at Utah, I always got this sense that like he's so fast and he hits the hole so hard oftentimes. But when I watched him and how he read everything, I felt like he must be closing his eyes and praying every time he got the ball heading in the direction of that hole. And I think this year I saw rosary beads wrapped around his hand with the ball, as he was doing that. But when you change a system for a back and put him in a scheme where he can actually do more of that to a fault, and he still couldn't do it very well, that just tells you that he doesn't have that eyes-feet connection. He's just an exciting athlete who can catch the ball and can make some really great moves. And he was a great college running back, but there's a difference, and it's that refinement. And I think Kenyon Drake may get there. Frank Gore obviously is still there, and I think Royce Freeman is there. And that's why as long as he improves as a pass protector, I think he's the lead back, and that people just don't understand that refinement oftentimes. And when you see it just off the hoof, just watching it without replaying and really analyzing it, it does look like, is he really trying?
What's he doing out there? Bloom, before we're out of here, I forgot to mention Saquon Barkley with Dr. Jene Bramel. Are you worried at all, concerned at all?
A little bit. I think maybe that he got clear to do individual drills, and I think in the game against Jacksonville, we'll hold our breath and hope he gets through without an issue. But I would not take him where he's going anyway, hamstring or no hamstring. But I think it's actually, we never want to see the seal broken on, as Dr. Team was laying out, for running backs on those soft tissue, lower body injuries. You never want to see the seal broken in training camp. And that to me is another reason to have a little bit of pause before you take Saquon Barkley as the number 6 or 7 or 8 overall pick.
Well, I know Devontae Booker may have been voted by his classmates most likely to have a butt fumble in the NFL. Bloom, I'm going to vote you most likely to not be wearing pants during this show.
No comment.
I'm just looking at your shirt, brother. I was like, well, I wonder what's on his shirt. And if he does stand up to show us,
It's actually,
you know.
Oh, yeah, right. It's the Detroit. It's an old Detroit Lions logo.
Wow.
I found it in a vintage
Nice.
store. Yeah.
Okay. Vintage Sigmund Bloom. And Matt Waldman, you're coming to Denver, buddy. We're going to party on Sunday.
We are going to have a good old time. It's going to be
Gonna be
awesome. At the
fantastic.
Cecil Lammey's draft party.
Right. My fantasy draft party. So everyone will be tweeting about that and probably have some Periscopes or Facebook Lives there for you as well. So everyone, that is a wrap for this evening's show. We've got a lot to get to in week 3 of the preseason. We certainly appreciate each and every one of you. And check out footballguys.com. Bloom, it seems like, well, and it is every day, but it's just like, okay, here's another boom. Here's another ton of information. Here's another boom, ton of information. Our Draft Dominator app doing quite well in the app stores. Make sure to check that out as well. Getting good feedback as always. And Bloom, it's back. And it's time. This is why we say win your league at Football Guys. It is about dominating the draft, and everyone's having fun. And it's draft, let's do cold pops and all that. But it's also about in-season management. And that's why you have to check out and subscribe to footballguys.com.
Yeah, and Matt Waldman wrote the definitive article about that. The table, the 4 legs of the table is just one leg, just 25%. And as we were reminiscing last night during the Festival OG draft, I did win. I'm not doing that to humble brag. I am doing that to tell people that my key players were Keelan Cole, Antonio Gates, and the Arizona Cardinals defense.
And you beat me by 11.
Yeah, and it was look, I'm just saying that maybe drafting can help you get to the playoffs, but to win the title, it's in-season management.
It takes so much more. Matt Waldman, final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this. I mean, there's so much emphasis on that draft that just remember that some of the things that you want to have coming up in season management with the Football Guys has to offer. I mean, things from like Bloom's rented defense to the top 10 piece that I do, as well as, top 250 forward. There's a lot of ways that you can look at how to accumulate waiver wire picks. And if you pay steady attention to free agency, you make some astute trades here and there possibly, and you also do a good job with lineup management, you can draft with a big gap in your team when you finish your draft and still wind up with a championship league appearance and a shot at winning it all.
And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. He's Matt Waldman. Follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. Follow Sigmund Bloom at Sigmund Bloom. I am Cecil Lammey, and the show is at the Audible. Go forth, dominate your leagues, and thank you as always for watching. Stay tuned and stay frosty.